Okay, and we're recording right now. And all yours.
Hey everyone, my name's Natalie, Erika James. I'm the director and co-writer of Relic. Thanks so much for coming to see the film.
Thank you so much for taking this time to talk to us. We're delighted that we're able to close a circle that started a few years ago when we first saw your short film, Creswick. And then one of the people from my crew saw you in Sundance and brought some beautiful Relic buttons back to the Morbido Crypt. So thank you.
Amazing. No, thanks for having me.
I wanted to ask you to open this up. If you can tell us a little bit how this film started. I know that at some point you went to see your grandmother, who's from Japan, and she was having problems in terms of health problems. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, my grandmother had Alzheimer's for quite a number of years, and as you mentioned, she lived in Japan, and I actually started writing the script on a trip that I took to visit her, and it was some time since I'd last seen her, maybe a couple of years, and unfortunately in between those times she had lost memory of me and couldn't remember who I was, and I obviously had like a lot of feelings of guilt about that, about not seeing her more often. And I think in combination with the fact that she lived in quite a creepy traditional Japanese house that had always really freaked me out as a kid, those two things kind of came together, the mood of the place and this really harrowing thing that was taking over my grandmother and her health. So that was the starting point for the film.
We mentioned Japan, and I want to bring this up. I feel there's a big influence of J-horror in the film, but at the same time, it's kind of digested. It's being assimilated in a very particular form because it's not like an overt homage. Are we right on that appreciation?
Yeah, I was I still am a really big J-horror fan growing up. So I certainly, and Gothic horror as well. So I certainly draw on those conventions. I mean, one of them, I suppose, is just having sympathy for the menace in a way. Like often in J-horror, the ghost is someone who's been wronged. It's often a woman who's been neglected or abused in some way. So yeah, having compassion for the characters that are supposed to be the scary ones, I think. Also the horror being like deeply psychological, I feel like that's a really strong J-horror component that I really love. And I also really love just building tension within the frame as opposed to kind of relying on the jump scares. Those kinds of conventions I tried to carry over into the film.
Marvelous. And tell me something, the work with your actresses is something that I think is quite marvelous in the film, especially these three generations, which is something we see in dramatic films, but in horror films is not so much touched upon. Were you able to, this experience from your grandmother, which is deeply personal, were you able to connect that with the actresses in working with them? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Definitely. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the actors are so open and so vulnerable with you throughout the process of working together that the best thing you can do is to afford them that same kind of openness. So I was definitely very, willing to talk about my own personal experience. And I think that strengthened our relationship and the trust that we built between us and the rapport. And I think it always drove home to them, why we were telling this story, to be able to connect it to something real and tangible. And to be able to point to like real things that had happened between my grandma and I, and to, draw the kind of emotional truth from that. And I think inevitably the actors will bring their own kind of personal relationships into the role as well. Their experience of being a daughter or a granddaughter, all those things. So in a way, what you see on screen is obviously taken to the supernatural extreme, but very much drawing on the real relationships in our lives.
When you made the movie, was there like a process of working with them to work out the, grandmother, mother, daughter relationship? Like you guys started rehearsing beforehand and all of that, or?
It was mostly in discussion, I have to say, prior to the shoot. you know, some, like Robin, for example, wrote letters to Emily's character as her character, those kinds of things. To be honest, we didn't have too much time together. I think Emily arrived 3 days before we shot or something like this. So, you know, timelines are always really tight, but you do the best that you can. And her and I had been talking months ahead of time before she arrived as well, because we shot in Australia. So yeah, it's built up over time. And as I said, you really do see the actors start to bring in their own kind of personal relationships and reimagine them into the role. So.
Wow. No, it's impressive because I did have this feeling that you had worked on that a lot and maybe had a rehearsal period, because you do feel these connections and you're like, yes, they're related, which is, you know, bravo.
Right. Oh, that's great. Yeah. I mean, what was really important was that, you know, the relationships feel abrasive. You know, we really wanted a sense that we kind of push back against this notion that women always have to be likable and have, you know, likable relationships, and that we wanted to go for something that was a bit more real. And the reality is that a lot of us have tension with our family members, and it doesn't mean that there's not a lot of love as well. It's just that you know, sometimes your personalities clash in a certain way.
It's no, it's super complicated. And I think also it's one of the things why people relate to this film in such an emotional level. I mean, I'm one of them who, after seeing this movie, you know, you touch on deeply emotional things, and it goes beyond just the, you know, the horror element or the scare element. It haunts you in a way, which I think is what the best, you know, genre movies do. It haunts us to the things that affect us emotionally, and you know, who's going to haunt us more than our own families, I guess, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I wanted to touch upon another factor, which I think is another character in your film, the house. It's a space that is very, I mean, it looks very normal, and yes, the house, but little by little, as you grow within the movie, you realize it's a character. I mean, there's even the subplot of where the window comes from as, you know, spaces that absorb the energy and absorb all these feelings. And I was quite captured by that, of how the space became, even in the third part of the movie, it became a huge headspace, or should I call it like a heart space, because it's, I think, much more emotional than just, you know, something mental. Can you tell me how you work with your production designer and with your DP to create that? Also, this thing with the black, yes, the mold. It gets scary to do cleaning after watching Relic, because you're like, you don't want to touch the mold after that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a huge character in the film. I think, if anything, you know, going back to when I first started writing it, the first image that came to me for the film was this idea of a space in which, in the house in which objects were hoarded, because my grandmother used to hoard things as her Alzheimer's got worse. And the idea of it growing inwards, and that it became this kind of never-ending space. And I guess a house is an interesting symbol, because it's so the place where we, you know, hold the physical manifestation of our memories in a way. You know, it's the objects that you accumulate over time, and it's the wear and tear that, you know, you create on a house. Those are kind of like the memories in itself. But at the same time, I kind of fell in love with the idea that it was much like people who are going through a change and who slowly become unfamiliar, that a house is supposed to be a safe space. It's the place that protects you, but then to turn that on its head is kind of the most terrifying thing, to take the familiar and make it unfamiliar, or to take the banal and to make it kind of uncanny or eerie. So those were the kinds of things that we had in mind when we were designing the space. So we at once wanted to make it feel like, you know, you could feel the history of the place, and that you could see all the ways in which the house had declined and had been neglected, much like, you know, you could see it as being emblematic of Edna's mind in a way. And so we, in terms of the design of it, we really went for spaces that still felt light and not signaling the horror from the get-go, but that could be kind of corrupted as we went along. We also had this notion of in designing all the spaces, having hidden areas so that things felt unseen or like not completely known, and there was a inscrutable component to the space in itself, and that just extended into the labyrinth too, which is what we call that weird space that sound gets lost in. And for that space, we really wanted it to still feel like it was part of the rest of the house and that there wasn't a clear break from reality. So we use the same architectural language for the rest of the house in that space too.
Was that a set, or was it a location?
Yeah, so it was kind of amazing how much we had to piece together all the different locations. So we had 2 locations. That one was mostly the exterior and the kitchen at the back, and then one was the interior, and then we built the upstairs rooms and the labyrinth itself. So there was a lot of rebuilding of hallways to kind of stitch together the 3 spaces.
Another thing that I wanted to bring upon, we know that your film has some big names attached in terms of producers and everything, which I'm sure helped the thing gel and everything. How was that? This was your first feature film, but I'm sure it brought certain pressures on top of this. Can you tell us a little bit how you managed with that and how it helped the movie?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, obviously we shot it in Australia, and I already had Australian producers on board. So when it started, it was going to be a much smaller film with just an Aussie kind of contingent. But through my agents, I was able to kind of, get these amazing producers on board, and coping with that. I don't know. In some ways, you have to separate that side of your brain that's kind of going, oh my God, I'm directing Emily Mortimer on set, or, whoever is my producer. And you do have to kind of put that aside and get back to like the work at hand. And in some ways I was surprised by how much you can fall back on everything you've, worked up to over the last 10 years. And you kind of go, oh, this is not that different when you come down to it, scene by scene and shot by shot. So I think it's just like ignoring the massive picture and like honing in on the macro and kind of going, okay, this is what I'm focusing on right now.
Claro. And I imagine, because your career, you've really been working on this for a while, sometimes, show business tries to say, oh, this person just kind of appeared in the map magically. And of course, it's every single day of work. But you've been, not only active in your career in terms of doing the short films, but also in promoting them. Can you say that festival work does give something back?
Oh, 100%. I think, in particular, you can meet collaborators first off. For example, I met my co-writer and my cinematographer at the same festival in 2012. So those kind of relationships really do kind of come to fruition. And I also think getting to know the festival programmers, of course, even I can point to specifically like Fantasia for being responsible for allowing me to sign with my agents in the States. So it all really makes a difference. Yeah.
Viva festivals, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just the opportunity to meet other directors who kind of become your, cohort and your community of filmmakers. I think that's really important, and probably one of the joys of going to festivals.
And also people that understand, the experience, because, yes, you guys get a lot of, of lights sometimes and everything, but it's really hard to do a movie. The amount of pressure and heartache that it involves sometimes with, projects falling and everything, it's difficult. Yeah. People forget that. They don't put that in the notes in Variety or everything else. Hard.
No, it's so true. And I guess the endurance is the big thing that you have to learn when you step up to do features, because you are staring at your film for months and months. And I think I've seen it like 200 times, but that's normal.
Yeah. And tell us, you recently won something with the Sundance Institute. You're now a fellow of I forget the name. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, I'm a Momentum Fellow, which is it's really lovely. They selected 8 filmmakers, and basically you just get a year of mentoring and life coaching, which is kind of ridiculous because I've never thought to get one my whole life. But yeah, it's great. Like, it's really makes you focus on like, here's where I am, here's where I want to go, how am I going to get there? And I guess it's just accountability to hold you to that. So
No, it's
yeah, it's
good,
really great.
especially, since I'm sure that all the light and the attention that you've received from Relic, I mean, it's helping, pave the next step in your career and the new projects, which we're hoping that they're still in horror. Yes,
They are, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
marvelous.
Everything I'm working on at the moment is within horror in some form or another. Yeah.
We're very happy to hear that the genre needs more of your touch and your sensibility. And on that, coming back to the movie, I wanted to ask you, did you feel at some point when you were, from the moment that you wrote the movie to when it was finished, did it change a lot in the process of post-production, in the editing? I'm thinking especially how it takes a sharp turn on the third act, where it becomes much more, uh, an allegory.
Yes, yeah. I have to say, no, that was there in the writing from the get-go. It was always a slow burn that kind of went off in the third act. I always pointed to something like Kill List, Ben Wheatley's film, which, has a similar structure in a way. So, no, that was always there from the beginning. In terms of what changed from script to edit, I think some stuff was cut out. There was more of a subplot with Jamie, the next door neighbor. And I think we added in a few, we did a pickup day to add a little bit more imagery to the dream sequences. But apart from that, it was pretty faithful to the script.
Okay, two last questions that are kind of extreme, different sides of the spectrum. I would ask you, if what was the hardest challenge creatively of this movie that you can remember for you? Not economic, just for you as a filmmaker.
I actually think, this is not creative necessarily, but shooting some of the scenes were hard just because they felt very personal. So in particular, the scene where Edna's burying the photos in the forest, that was really tough, and a really tough one to write as well. I think I remember rewriting it the day before after workshopping it with the actors, and on the day just sobbing behind monitor. Yeah, it's good in a way because hopefully that it works, but I found that personally challenging. I think tracking Edna's transformation was a challenge in terms of her deterioration, and at what point we switched to the next stage of her deterioration, all those things. But those are just fun, creative challenges.
And then on the other extreme of the question, what was the most fun, or did you have a moment of joy whilst doing the movie?
Yeah, so many moments, but I didn't anticipate how much I would fall in love with doing stunts on this film. And it's not that we have that many, but towards the end of the film there is some. And I remember really distinctly the scene where Sam and Kay go through the wall, where they're doing the tug of war, and then they could come through. So that whole stunt, I remember really distinctly. My family came to visit on that day. And so it was kind of this amazing, a way to celebrate, because it was probably the day where there was the most people on set, and there was 100 people milling around, and my family were there. And that just stands out to me as a particularly joyful kind of day.
That's beautiful to hear. And I imagine that for you, it's obvious that for you it was quite a personal endeavor, and it brought closure of sorts. I imagine your family as well, kind of understood all the connections to what actually had happened. So do you feel that also it was therapeutical? I've heard so many reactions of people that when they go see this movie, they're able to cry about things they kind of hid from themselves, and which I find so magical. I also think that the fact that this movie is so filled with heart and love, it has helped people in this horrible situation that we're living, where you cannot say goodbye to people because of the burials within COVID. that you're able to go into that emotional space where we can let go.
Yeah. No, I mean, that was always my hope for it. I never went into it thinking, oh, this is going to necessarily be, you know, a cathartic experience for me, or this will help me deal with, you know, my grandmother's decline or anything like that. But I think in retrospect, that is what's happened now that it's been a year since I finished it and, you know, it's been released. And yeah, I think overall, particularly the fact that I was able to share, you know, some of it with my family, and we were traveling. I was actually traveling in Japan with my parents when we found out about Sundance, and you know, we got to see my grandma for the last time before she passed. It was all very like tied up together. But I think as well, the amount of messages I've gotten from people saying the same thing about the fact that, yeah, it's helped them process the experience in some way has been the most rewarding out of anything in making the film. So yeah, I'm kind of stunned. Yeah.
It's testament to all the love that you brought to the movie, I think, and passion. And as a program, I have to say, it's such a joy to find works of this caliber. You know, right now, I think the genre needs this type of energy. And we're delighted that people like you are the ones who are bringing it.
Oh, thank you, man.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing this with us and being so open. And we're waiting for more movies from you anxiously. And we're delighted that Mexican audiences are going to have a chance to see this movie in theaters next year through Tulip Pictures. And thank you once again.
Thank you. Hope I can come to more Vito sometime soon.
Yes, please. Your place is reserved, so you just need to make another move. All right?
Great.
Okay.
Thanks
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Mm-hmm.